Hey everyone, John here, and today we are ranking the 15 greatest Nintendo remasters of all time. We're not just sticking to the Switch with Wii U to Switch ports or Wii to Switch ports, we're counting everything that's ever been remastered on Nintendo. Now before we get into this, yes, the definition of remaster is loose. There's many games out there which I would say border more on the line of remake, and yet all the marketing says it's a remaster. So what I'm going by here is if Nintendo have said it's a remaster, then we're counting it as a damn remaster. So there are games on this list like Metroid Prime Remastered. Remastered is in the title. They've redone everything, but it's still a remaster. And so I guess the definition more so is about, is it just visually and audio-wise redone? Is the gameplay still entirely intact? If so, then I suppose by their definition it's a remaster. Anyway, let's get through this dang thing. To kick things off, we have a game in the new Play Control series. This was a series of games that took GameCube games and gave them Wii controls. Now, the Wii was already backwards compatible with the GameCube, so there were a few enhancements, like widescreen, but for the most part, this was all about motion controls, although some games did add more content, like Donkey Kong over here. Anyway, we're not focusing on Donkey Kong, though, because that game is nothing without the barrels. Instead, we are focusing on these two right here, Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2. I find it very hard to go back to the original control scheme after these. It is so natural to control Olimar with the nunchuck and freely move that cursor around with the Wii remote. In fact, this became a standard for Pikmin 3 on the Wii U. Whenever they showed that game, the gamepad would be like a map on your lap or on the desk or something, but the game would be controlled with the Wii remote and nunchuck. That was the ideal way to play the game. It can't quite be replicated on the Switch without the sensor bar. When you've got that constant sync on the Wii, nothing comes close. The Wii was always great at pointing. That was the secret of this system. It wasn't waggle, it wasn't traditional motion, it was pointing at the screen and having a cursor that you can move around anywhere. This made any game with pointing or shooting spectacular, and Pikmin was just a constant joy to play with this scheme. To this day, these are my favorite versions of Pikmin. And at number 14, we have Game & Watch games. Now, the Game & Watch Gallery series is grossly underrated. I grew up with this series, I'm sure many of us did. These games are still so much fun to return to. Although all the Mario stuff definitely falls into the realm of being a remake. These aren't ports. However, there are also the original classic versions of those Game & Watch games, available on a far more flexible screen and obviously far more affordable. And while these are definitely neat, I want to draw your attention to these two games here. This is Game & Watch Collection 1 and Game & Watch Collection 2 for DS. These were Club Nintendo exclusives, and they featured just raw ports of Game & Watch games. And what's great specifically about this first one is it contains nothing but dual-screened Game & Watch games, because that's where the dual screen came from originally. It wasn't the DS, it was these Game & Watch systems. And they very carefully recreate these games, giving you a very authentic feeling. Regardless of whether you've played the original Game & Watches or not, these give you the essence. You may as well have played them, you may as well have owned them, if you have played these two here. And at number 13, we have the most underrated Zelda remaster, A Link to the Past 4 Swords. Now, I think most people think that this game just kind of tacked on 4 Swords and didn't really do much to A Link to the Past, and that is not true. This is one of the best Super Nintendo conversions on the Game Boy Advance, and one thing I adore about this is there is a brightness toggle. So many Game Boy Advance games are overexposed or have too high a contrast to make it visible on that original screen, but this one allows you to go either super dark, normal, or super bright, so it's viewable on a backlit screen or a non-backlit screen. It doesn't compromise anything. Mix that with being able to make the text much faster, having quality of life improvements like easier to navigate menus and easier to navigate warp screens, and being able to hit like pots with your sword. Like, that's just kind of a it's not like a radical difference, but it's there. But then you've also got the cross progression with 4 Swords. So if you finish Four Swords, you get access to the Four Sword Dungeon, an entirely new dungeon just for this version of the game. And if you get 10 multiplayer medals within Four Swords, you get a brand new side quest, which is just doing all these scavenger hunts, trying to get all these monsters or items in your net, and then you're rewarded with a giant spin attack that was never in the original, and statues in your house. It's a link to the past, but more flexible, with more stuff, it's portable, and yes, the audio is a bit worse than the Super Nintendo version. There's a slight bit of screen crunch, it doesn't really affect anything, but it is there. But I still think this is the best way to play A Link to the Past. And plus, because it's the Game Boy Advance, it had to flex that it could do voices, and so Link screams like an Ocarina of Time. Is that a bonus? I don't know. At number 12, we have another Zelda game. This is Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, and this is a very important game. The original Wii U Hyrule Warriors was very good, but if you skipped over Legends, the 3DS port, then you missed out on a lot, and I'm not just talking about content, because yes, that version added more characters and more stages, but it also had a detrimental gameplay difference in allowing you to just move your units without controlling them. So you can go into the menu and just say, hey, Link, move over there. And you can continue playing as Zelda while Link goes elsewhere, and then quickly switch to them. It makes things far more strategic, it makes things easier to manage, and it's very hard to go back to the Wii U version without that. And Definitive Edition brings that back. It basically has the graphical core of the Wii U version, apart from its higher resolution, it runs better, and you have all that 3DS content too. You've got Linkle's story in HD for the first time. All those levels that were 3DS specific have been remade with these Wii U-esque visuals. And there's also mild changes, like some lighting is a little bit different. But overall, this is just the most packed version of this game and truly earns the Definitive Edition moniker. And at number 11, we have another Definitive Edition. This is Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Now, this is quite a drastic remaster. They've gone in and they've changed every single model in the game. Everyone's face now has a much more universal with Xenoblade 2 anime look. And honestly, I like the original faces. I think they're very expressive, but clearly they are quite low res. So this is a huge bump in just visual fidelity. It makes the entire presence of every scene just feel a bit more high budget. And if that's all they changed, this would still be a pretty remarkable difference. But no, they've gone in and they've adjusted so many of the textures. The entire world just feels like it was made for Switch. You wouldn't think this were a Wii game, especially given the scale of the world. This game was always impressive on the Wii for what it achieved in terms of its raw reach. These environments are absolutely huge, and seeing them with this uncompromised visual look is stunning. But they've also gone in and they've changed the entire soundtrack. You can toggle between the original and the remastered version. They're both very, very good. And the menus, they've seen a massive overhaul. The original ones were kind of basic and not that inviting to navigate, but these ones have nice big fonts, they're just visually appealing, and it makes just everything feel more connected. And speaking of connected, we also have Future Connected. This was something many fans discussed for years. It was just this unreachable area in Xenoblade 1. But they fully realized it here. They've taken that cut content and they've put an epilogue in there. And while it may not be the most exciting story content out there, it's still just great to get more time with these characters and to fully realize something that felt unreachable until now. At number 10, we have 3D Classics Kirbys Adventure. And if you're not familiar with this, you may be staring at it and saying, John, this looks exactly the same as the NES game. And you're not entirely wrong, it does look very much like the NES game. But the thing is, with these 3D Classics releases, they essentially remade these games to be native to the 3DS. And if you were to look back at the NES version of Kirbys Adventure, it would run a bit like this. Whenever there's too many sprites on screen, whenever you use an attack which uses rather complex visual elements, everything would come to a crawl. And this version fixes that. This is just a silky smooth 60 FPS Kirbys Adventure without any dips. And the NES version certainly can't claim that. This makes Kirbys Adventure more enjoyable than it's ever been before. But then, you crank up the 3D slider, and all of a sudden it's 3D as well. This entire series was awesome, by the way. The game selection was definitely questionable. There were certain big games like Super Mario Bros. 3 or Metroid that weren't included. But this is just a remarkable version of Kirby, and it sucks that it's stuck on the 3DS, because I would take just a raw, un-3D-ified port of Kirby's Adventure with no slowdown any day. Now, at number 9, we actually have 3 games, and honestly, I thought I'd place these way higher, but no, here we are. Other games I think just take it a bit further. These are the HD Zelda games, and they're definitely not all equal. They shouldn't all share this spot, so instead we're going to be doing an A, B, and C rank. And let's just talk about them first. So Wind Waker HD, I think when you look at it, you think it's the most striking overhaul of the lot. And it definitely is striking. They've redone the entire lighting system. So while most of the textures are still exactly the same as they were on GameCube, the lighting is completely different. And there's now a lot of shaded areas, a lot more shadows. And I love how when you're sailing, the hues of the water change because of the lighting. So you go through these very different shades of blue, these sort of orangey looking seas. It's a beautiful looking game. Although at times it can look a bit overexposed, and the whole cell shading effect can get a bit lost at times under certain conditions, but for the most part this is still a very beautiful looking version of Wind Waker. Not everyone loves the visual additions, but they're quite nice. Twilight Princess HD, most people think does not look different to the original, and this is a case where it looks as you remember, but as you remember is not as it looks. So the Wii version and GameCube versions were very, very blurry. Some textures probably could have passed on the N64, but every texture has been redone in the Wii U version. It is such a drastically different looking game, and lighting adjustments are there too. It's not as obvious unless you're putting them head to head, but this is quite a different looking version of Twilight Princess. And then we've got Skyward Sword HD, which it's just kind of Skyward Sword, but in HD. The art style doesn't really allow for a massive texture overhaul. Like, they have been redone to an extent, but it's not that obvious. The key point here, though, is the game is now 60 FPS, which is a huge improvement, especially for how responsive the motion controls are. They feel so much better in the Switch version. Now, in terms of quality of life improvements, it's all over the board. Wind Waker HD gets the Swift Sail, which you could argue undermines the whole wind aspect because you never need to use it anymore, because you can just ignore the wind and go at twice the speed, but it's super, super convenient. There's also things like the Triforce quest being far shorter. There are less pieces to collect, and the cost to get them is far lower. There's no need to grind more rupees and get a higher wallet. You can just go through it as easy as you want to. And of course, the gamepad, you can just swing items now whenever you want to without pausing the game. And also when you're sailing, there's no need to pause to see exactly what direction you're going in. You can just keep sailing, look down, and just follow the map on the gamepad. Very, very good stuff. Twilight Princess HD has a bunch of minor stuff. So the swimming and climbing animations have been sped up. They've not been changed, they've just been sped up. It looks a bit funky, but I guess it's nicer. It no longer tells you what everything is when you boot the game up, and that's very nice. Because on Wii and GameCube, it'd be like no matter if you're like 40 hours in, it'd be like, that red rupee's worth 20. You can turn into a wolf by just tapping the gamepad. There's no need to talk to Midna. It's just fast and snappy. And I guess taking a note from Wind Waker's Triforce quest, the Tears of Light have become fewer. Both games just sort of got rid of some content to make the pacing a bit better. Skyward Sword HD also makes a bunch of tweaks, and most of it's to do with pacing. Characters can now talk way faster. You can just skip through dialogue, you can skip through cutscenes that you previously couldn't do until New Game Plus. In the intro, they've just taken out whole chunks, and if you want to, you can still talk to people, but it's not mandatory anymore. The game just moves way, way faster. Just like Twilight Princess, it no longer tells you exactly what an item is every time you boot up the game, and that's more important here because there's all these materials to collect too. There's an auto-save now. So I think the way I would rank these is Wind Waker in spot A. That is probably the most drastic remaster. It does the most to adjust the game and make it look different. That is in 9A. And then I put Skyward Sword in 9B. I think it does more than Twilight Princess to just adjust the general gameplay. The 60 FPS bump is big, the pacing differences are big, so while Twilight Princess HD is still a very good version of the game, and something I'd say is in some ways better than both of the ones above it, I think it deserves spot C. Anyway, moving on! At number 8, we have Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door. And I know there's going to be some comments. Isn't this a remake? Isn't this the game just running on the brand new Origami King engine? Yeah, it is. They still call it a remaster though. And I think the way we should judge this is if you squint your eyes and you still think that it's Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door from 20 years ago, then it should count. But this is still an incredible re-release of the game. And it would be even higher than it is if it weren't for the fact that it isn't a universal upgrade. The only thing that isn't better than the GameCube version is the frame rate. That game ran at 60, this one runs at 30. Personally, I do not think it's a big deal. I adjusted to it very, very quickly, but I can't rank it higher because of that. But every other surrounding element is so good. The game is one of the best looking things to grace the Switch. The soundtrack too, while not every track is better than the original, it's more diverse. They have all these battle themes in every region of the game, and there's all this quality of life stuff, like more warps. It's just so much easier to navigate the world. Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door is absolutely one of, if not the, best Mario RPGs out there. And so if you are to play any version, I would highly recommend this one. The GameCube version is still good, but this is an audio-visual treat for the eyes. There's some areas that I didn't love in the GameCube version, like this area here, that looks stunning on Switch. Anyway, let's keep moving on. We spent too long on Zelda. At number 7, we have a Super Mario remaster. So this right here is Super Mario All-Stars for the Super Nintendo. And you may notice, no title cards coming up. Is that because that's not the game we're talking about? You bet it is. So this is a very ambitious compilation, especially for the era. Basically remaking 4 games. Mario 1, Lost Levels, Mario 2, Mario 3. But I don't really like how Mario 1 is here. Like, look, he just goes through those bricks. It's not right. This isn't how it should be. And so while Mario 2 and Mario 3 are very competent and good versions, I think it got better. On the Game Boy Advance, we had Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. And while this is greatly based on that Super Nintendo All-Stars version, it does even more. Not only does this come with a full-on remake of Mario Bros., as did all the Mario Advance games, and this is definitely worth your time, especially multiplayer, the battle modes are fantastic, but it also came with an even more refined remake of Super Mario Bros. 3, one of the best platformers of all time. It looks outstanding. Mario says things, whether you like that or not. That's a Game Boy Advance thing. Maybe you had to be there for that, I don't know. What really puts this ahead of Super Mario All-Stars is they essentially packed in the Game Boy Advance's original Mario game into this port. If you had an e-reader and all the cards, I don't know if you did, but if you had one, you would have had access to a plethora of new levels, and that is unlocked here on NSO. So you get a few remakes. There's I think there's up until World 2 or something for original Super Mario Bros. Remakes, and those are cool to play in the Super Mario Bros. 3 style. But from there on, it is completely original stuff. And not only is it original, but it remixes stuff from across the entire Mario Advance series. So you've got turnip plucking from Super Mario Advance 1, Super Mario Bros. 2. You've got the cape from Super Mario Advance 2, Super Mario World. What a confusingly titled series. And you just got all these elements sprinkled across all these Mario games coming together into one in Super Mario Bros. 3. Once you have access to this e-reader stuff, it is so far ahead of what All-Stars was doing, and personally, I just always preferred this version even without the e-reader stuff. And at number 6, we have Star Fox 64 3D, a complete audio-visual remake of the original N64 game, and it is glorious. The only thing we're really missing is that first-person cockpit view. It's weird that that's not here. But otherwise, it is just mwah! The original version didn't always run that well, and while I think the art style still holds up, it is just glorious here, especially in 3D. This is one of the best 3D showcases of the system. There's points in this game that feel like they were made for 3D. Obviously, they weren't, but when enemies are like close up to the screen, you've got to break for them to overtake you. They pop out of this. It feels like it was made for that. They pop out of the screen. It's just, it's beautiful. So many levels look outstanding. It's great to see those low frame rate levels like the underwater one fully realized here. And there's also a bunch of quality of life stuff. You can play the 3DS mode, which has gyro, or you can save whenever you want and back out, or if you've found an alternate route, you can still take the normal route if you want to. Star Fox 64 has just never been this flexible and free and just stunningly beautiful. I will say the multiplayer probably doesn't top the original, but the core game is just wonderful, and I hope that every 3DS owner has at least given this a go. At number 5, we have Metroid Prime Remastered. Honestly, I thought this would be higher, but there's a few games I think that top it. So this is Metroid Prime in its original state. The gameplay is 100% intact, there are very few changes to that itself, but the visual overhaul is so far ahead of anything else here. They have just modernized everything. This looks like this could pass for a modern PlayStation 5 game. That's how good it looks. If this were in 4K on PlayStation 5, I would not question it. It looks that stunningly beautiful. Every area is just breathtaking. There's so many remasters out there that look basically as you remember them, but cleaner, but not this one. You know immediately that this is not how the GameCube version looked. And what's even better is it maintains that original 60 FPS that the GameCube sought after, while having visuals that pass basically anything else on the Switch. We did a video ranking the best looking games on this system a while ago before this game came out, and I'm kind of tempted just to re-release it with this one at the top. It deserves to be shouted out for all that it does. And while there aren't that many gameplay adjustments, it's still very cool to have all this controller flexibility. You can play with dual sticks, which is that's a first for Metroid Prime. This was always a single stick game, and you can still play with that single stick scheme if you want to. But there's also a free gyro cursor, like Metroid Prime Trilogy and 3. And that works surprisingly well too. In fact, I've done multiple playthroughs of this game just using different control schemes, and it's just a blast playing it that way. And there's also a few technical improvements too, like on GameCube and Wii when you shoot at a door. You just kind of have to wait there sometimes for the game to load it in, but that never happens here. So while the trilogy may have more value, being Prime 1, Prime 2, and Prime 3, I think we can all respect the sheer effort that was put in to what they did here with Prime 1. We can understand why it's not all of them, because of how much is done here. At number 4, we have another 3D Classics. This is 3D Classics Kid Icarus. Now, Kid Icarus wasn't quite as hard done by as Kirby when it came to performance. It could definitely slow down in areas. But the major difference here is on NES, the background here is just black. They sometimes have like a sky background in some stages, but other times it's just black. And in this version, they've gone in and they've added a background to every level, and this contextually changes the game. The game was always about starting in the underworld and making your way gradually to Skyworld, but unless you read the instruction manual, I don't think that's clear. But now you're starting in this lavery, fiery area, and then you gradually see more earthly things like a tree. Suddenly you're outside in what's very clearly the world, and then you start to see the sky, and you're gradually getting higher and higher until you get to Skyworld to take down Medusa. Frankly, I've never finished this game before until I started recording footage for this video. I always respected Kid Icarus, but I was never good at Kid Icarus, and I don't think I truly got it. But this time something clicked, and I think it is the recontextualized backgrounds. This is a game that starts off really hard, but gradually you level up and become stronger, and it's a great feeling of power. All those struggles that really got you at the start of the game become pretty meaningless. Like, you can just take things down instantly, you've got all this health. Kid Icarus starts as a hard game, but it's got like a reverse learning curve, and I fully appreciate it now because of this version of the game. And the 3D effect is also wonderful. If you've never really got Kid Icarus before, like you've played a level or two but it just didn't stick, I recommend trying this one, if you can. It's not sold anymore. Anyway, at number 3, we have Metopia. Now, this video is not about the best games, it's about the best remaster effort. And while Metopia is not a bad game, it clearly doesn't hold a candle to a lot of other games on this list. But still, the effort that Grezzo put in is nuts. They didn't need to do this. They've taken a 3DS game and they've basically done everything from scratch. Every texture is new, but what really makes this go above and beyond is that damn Mii Maker. So in the original, just like Tomodachi Life, you just take Miis and they become part of your game. In this one, though, they introduced the mechanic of makeup and wigs. And what this allows you to do is get far more flexible with your Miis and basically make them into anything you want them to be. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this might be the most flexible character creator ever made. And it's in Miitopia. It's bonkers that this hasn't returned for anything else. Like, this should just be a system-wide Mii feature. It's that good. It's crazy that Tomodachi Life hasn't returned with this feature, but people have made all this stuff using an in-game Mii Maker. This is Hotel Mario, made with a Mii Maker. Look at all these, like, they've got art styles going on here. Marin looks like she's come straight out of Link's Awakening. She has that shiny toy look. It was done in a Mii Maker. Pyra, Cat. Look at all these characters. It's bonkers. I have nothing to say. It's so good. Every other part of this remaster is really good as well, but it's this Mii Maker that really puts it over everything else. I don't know why they went this hard, but they did. So what is at number 2? We have something that's quite jarringly different. Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. Unlike Miitopia, they haven't actually changed a whole lot when you look at it. This is basically the Wii U game, but no longer in 720p. It's 1080p now. And that's a pretty nice visual upgrade, but that's kind of all they've done to upgrade it. Of course, there's Bowser's Fury, a brand new sandbox Mario. A smaller one, but still one that everyone should play because I think it's a peek at the future of what Mario is going to be, and it's very good in its own right. But let's keep focusing on just 3D World for a moment. Why this is number 2 is because they have made so many gameplay adjustments that are drastic to the game. So I never thought that the Wii U version was exactly slow until they did the Switch version. Every character has been drastically sped up. Like, look here, this is the Wii U version, the exact same characters taken more or less the same route, and look how quickly Switch overtakes it. But then, what if we took the fastest character on Wii U, being Toad, and compared them to the slowest character on Switch, being Peach? And they're basically the same. So the slowest character is the same speed as the fastest character. That's how much things have changed. But then there's also other stuff. They've added the Odyssey Dive, which is absolutely massive. That's a game changer. It makes how you approach levels and move around them completely different. But then there's also minor things like it just saves rather than pausing the game now. It's a nice little pacing tweak. You can play the entire thing online. That's massive! Like, no other Mario game did that before then. It's wild. 3D World was already one of the best Mario games and easily one of the best Wii U games. But they thought, no, we've got to make it even better. And so this, just for those reasons alone, it may not touch the visuals much, it may not touch the audio at all, but 3D World is simply better, more enjoyable, faster, easier to navigate, easier to express yourself in. This is the best version of that game. And then you got Bowser's Fury, which is wonderful. Anyway, at number 1, we have The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time 3D. I placed the HD versions at number 9, quite a bit lower. And I think Ocarina actually doesn't get the respect it deserves for how good it is. People know it's good, people talk about it, but they don't talk about just how good it is. It's got basically everything that the other remasters had put into one. So you've got the obvious visual makeover that Wind Waker HD had. Everything has been redone. There's no longer these blocky N64 models. Link in particular looks radically different. The entire art style is quite different too. It's a bit more in line with the manual, a lot more colourful. Especially towns, they're no longer pre-rendered, they're done within the game itself. It is a night and day difference. And this game was basically the first one to put gyro into a traditional control scheme, and that's become a standard in Zelda. Every 3D Zelda has done that since then, and it might still be the best here, to be honest. Just getting your slingshot out and moving the controller around without touching the stick works wonderfully, and if you go to shooting ranges, it's even better. But when you compare it to the original, where the aiming is very twitchy, especially when you're playing on something that isn't an N64 controller with that wide reach with the analog stick, it's you cannot go back. It's just such a huge difference. But then you've got stuff too, like the iron boots no longer being something in the menu. It's now just an equipable item. And speaking of items, there's 2 extra slots, while also making the ocarina a dedicated button at all times. Like, it goes so far. It fixes basically every nitpick I had about Ocarina of Time, while addressing stuff that I wasn't even complaining about. And while I would have liked the music to have a similar makeover to what the visuals had, everything else is just so good. And by the way, the original N64 version ran at like 20 FPS, and I grew up with the PAL version which ran at like 16 FPS. So getting a solid 30 is even bigger than Skyward Sword going from 30 to 60. Like, going from 16 to 30, going from an unstable frame rate to a stable one, is a bigger upgrade than any of those HD remasters had. And while Majora's Mask had similar upgrades, it also kind of undermined the game design in many ways and took a few too many creative liberties, while Ocarina basically didn't change the core at all. This is Ocarina of Time, just in its best form. And man, that 3D effect. When you first step into Hyrule Field, it feels expansive. It's like you can look into the distance and just see it flowing forever. And many 3DS games took a much weaker effect from there on. I'm not really sure why. It was very impressive here, and I wish more games just kind of went for this scale. But even Majora's Mask 3D had a much weaker effect. But yes, I truly believe this is the best Nintendo remaster of all time, and it's not even really close. It's frankly been a delight just revisiting all of these games. There's a couple of games here which I just played all of them, or played huge chunks of, because I was just enjoying my time with them. Nintendo have put out so many great games over the years, and seeing these definitive, refined versions of some of their absolute best is... it's a good time. And while the Switch is home to a lot of them, they're not all on the Switch. The Game Boy Advance has many definitive greats, and I can never go back to GameCube Control Pikmin. Trying to play Pikmin HD on the Switch, like, it's fine, but I want my Wii Remote controls, and I want them now. Anyway, thank you for watching all the way until the end. And because you did, it is hot take time. And my hot take today is that a remaster cannot replace the original. Now, in some cases, you get a remaster that is basically the original version, but in a higher resolution and a higher frame rate. And you might say, isn't that just universally better? Like, why would you still want to hold on to the original? Well, I think there's always that historical importance of that first release on its original hardware. But in many cases, there are very few remasters that actually just 100% are an upgrade over the original. There's usually something that's different, whether it's a gameplay adjustment or a bug fix. Like, sometimes bug fixes can be detrimental to the game flow. Sometimes you have to lean into those, and if a game fixes something that you quite liked, then no longer definitive. So there's always value in older versions, and there are many cases where the original version stands above the remaster. Personally, I prefer the Thousand Year Door on the Switch, but if someone were to say to me, I'm going to stick with the GameCube version, I'd say you do that. Have fun. Have fun with with extra frames. Have a great time. Anyway, thank you for watching all the way until the end, and I will catch you another time. Bye-bye, everyone.